The snow fell quietly over the suburban neighborhood, blanketing the streets in an untouched white stillness. But inside the Johnsons' modest home, the air buzzed with an unspoken tension. Marcus tightened his grip on the wooden angel he'd just carved, his knuckles whitening as he overheard the conversation outside. "They just moved here last month, and already, I don't know, they just don't seem like us," said a familiar voice. A neighbor, one of the many who had offered polite but distant smiles since the Johnsons arrived. Ellie's laughter echoed from the living room, where she carefully placed ornaments on the family's modest Christmas tree. To her, this was still the season of magic, where kindness was wrapped in ribbons and hope twinkled like fairy lights. Marcus glanced at his wife Sophia, her face calm yet heavy with understanding. He didn't need to say a word. They both felt it, the unwelcoming chill that not even Christmas could melt. As the neighborhood's festive block party loomed, the question wasn't just whether they'd attend, but whether they'd ever truly belong. If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Stories Unfolded. Stay tuned for stories that challenge perspectives and inspire change. Marcus Johnson had always believed in building a home, not just a house. When he and Sophia first saw the little bungalow on Maple Lane, its chipped shutters and creaky front steps didn't deter them. To Marcus, it was a canvas waiting to come alive. To Sophia, it was a place where Ellie could grow up, safe, surrounded by the kind of community every child deserved. The neighborhood itself seemed like something out of a postcard. Snow-covered roofs sparkled under golden streetlights, and every lawn boasted elaborate decorations, dancing reindeer, glowing Santas, and carefully strung lights that blinked in perfect harmony. It was festive, warm, inviting. At least that's how it looked from the outside. Sophia had been the first to notice the subtle cracks in the neighborhood's shiny facade. When she introduced herself at the local bakery, the cashier's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. At the grocery store, an older woman gave her a once-over that felt more like a verdict than a glance. And when Ellie raced ahead to join a group of kids at the park, the way their parents quickly gathered them away spoke louder than words. Still, the Johnsons had chosen hope over doubt. Marcus worked tirelessly to renovate their home, pouring his craft as a carpenter into every detail. He repaired the shutters, painted the front door a cheerful red, and carved small ornaments to adorn their tree. Meanwhile, Sophia baked cookies for the neighbors, delivering them with Ellie, who always wore her brightest smile. Then came the flyers. Linda Harper, the self-appointed organizer of all things festive on Maple Lane, had slipped them into every mailbox. "Join us for the annual Christmas Eve block party," it read in bold letters, accompanied by cheerful illustrations of carolers and candy canes. Ellie had been ecstatic, chattering non-stop about the games and treats, but Sophia noticed the way Linda hesitated when she handed the flyer directly to her. "It's mostly, for the long-time residents," Linda said with a tight smile, her words lined with the kind of politeness that didn't leave room for argument. That night Marcus sat quietly at the dining table, running his hand over the grain of the wood he'd just sanded for a new project. "We'll go anyway," Sophia said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We're here to stay, Marcus. This is our home now." Marcus nodded, but in his heart, he couldn't shake the feeling that their presence was seen as an unwelcome addition to this perfect neighborhood. The days leading up to Christmas were a flurry of activity on Maple Lane. Lights twinkled brighter, inflatable Santas bobbed merrily in the breeze, and the scent of pine and gingerbread wafted through the air. But for the Johnsons, the festive cheer was a distant hum, muted by the small but persistent reminders of their outsider status. One evening, as Marcus stepped outside to clear the snow off their walkway, he caught the sound of hushed voices drifting from a group of neighbors gathered across the street. Their laughter died down as one of them noticed Marcus and nudged the others. For a moment, the quiet was thicker than the snow falling around them. Then, a woman's voice broke the silence. "I just don't know if they'd fit in, It's always been such a close-knit tradition." Marcus felt a familiar sting in his chest, but kept his focus on the task at hand, his shovel cutting into the snow with deliberate precision. He had learned long ago that listening was often better than reacting, but when he stepped back inside, Sophia could see the tension in his shoulders. "What is it?" she asked, handing him a steaming mug of tea. "Nothing," he replied, though his jaw was tight. "Just neighbors talking." Sophia didn't press him. Instead, she turned her attention to Ellie, who was busy arranging their small collection of Christmas decorations. "Mommy, why don't we have lights like the other houses?" Ellie asked innocently. Her big brown eyes blinked up at Sophia, filled with the kind of curiosity that only a child could muster. Sophia glanced at Marcus, who had paused mid-sip. "We'll put up lights, sweetheart," he said, his voice steady. "But how about we do something even better?" The next morning, Marcus disappeared into his workshop, emerging hours later with the first piece of what would become his masterpiece, an intricately carved nativity scene. Piece by piece he brought it to life, from the humble manger to the delicate figures of Mary, Joseph, and the baby Jesus. Each detail reflected his love for his craft and his determination to create something that would show their neighbors who they truly were. By the time the nativity scene was finished and displayed on their front lawn, it was nothing short of breathtaking. The figures seemed to glow under the soft light Marcus had carefully installed, and the craftsmanship was so precise that it drew admiration even from passers-by. Ellie couldn't contain her excitement. "Can I tell my friends at school? I want them to see it," she asked, bouncing on her toes. "Of course," Marcus said, his lips curling into a rare smile. "Tell them all to come by." That afternoon, a group of neighborhood kids stood in awe before the nativity scene, their chatter filled with wonder. One of the boys ran home to fetch his parents, and soon enough, a small crowd had gathered. Mrs. Green, an older neighbor with a kind face, was the first adult to break the unspoken barrier. "This is absolutely stunning," she said to Marcus, her voice warm. "You've got quite the talent. I hope you'll consider bringing some of your work to the Christmas party." Before Marcus could respond, Linda Harper appeared, her fur-lined coat dusted with snow. She surveyed the scene with a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's very unique," she said, her tone measured. "But I'm not sure it fits with the theme we've established for the block party." Mrs. Green raised an eyebrow. "The theme? I thought Christmas was about inclusion." Linda's cheeks flushed, and she quickly changed the subject, but the moment hung in the air like an unfinished melody. For the first time, Marcus saw the faintest flicker of doubt in Linda's usually unshakable demeanor. Later that evening, as the lights on the nativity scene cast a gentle glow over the snow, Marcus and Sophia sat on their porch, sipping hot chocolate. "It's a start," Sophia said softly, her hand resting on his. "People are noticing." "Not everyone," Marcus replied, glancing toward the darkened windows of Linda Harper's house. The week before Christmas was a delicate balancing act of hope and tension for the Johnsons. Marcus and Sophia kept themselves busy, Sophia baking cookies for Ellie's friends, and Marcus crafting smaller decorations to give as gifts. Meanwhile, Ellie eagerly told anyone who would listen about the nativity scene her dad had made. Slowly, their yard became a gathering spot for neighborhood kids, even those whose parents had previously kept their distance. But while the children were drawn to the beauty of Marcus's work, the adults were not so easily swayed. In whispered conversations at the grocery store or during casual encounters on the street, skepticism lingered. Linda Harper, in particular, found herself increasingly cornered by subtle challenges to her authority as the neighborhood's de facto holiday planner. Mrs. Green was often at the heart of these moments. "Have you seen what Marcus built?" she asked during a meeting Linda had called to finalize the party arrangements. "It's exquisite. Surely they should be part of this celebration." Linda's expression stiffened. "I'm sure it's lovely," she replied with a forced smile. "But the block party has always had a certain tone. We wouldn't want to disrupt that." Mrs. Green tilted her head, her eyes sharp but her voice gentle. "And what tone would that be, Linda? The tone of keeping some people out?" The room grew quiet, neighbors shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Linda's husband John spoke for the first time that evening. "I think Mrs. Green has a point," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Christmas is about bringing people together, not keeping them apart." Linda shot him a surprised look but said nothing. For the first time, her carefully curated confidence seemed to falter. At home later that night, Linda sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames. John watched her from the doorway, his arms crossed. "You know, Linda, it wouldn't hurt to invite them," he said quietly. "Marcus and Sophia seem like good people. And Ellie, well, she reminds me of our kids when they were little." Linda sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's not that simple, John. This neighborhood has traditions, and I have to think about everyone." "Do you?" he asked, stepping closer. "Or are you just thinking about yourself?" He was cold now. His words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Linda didn't answer, but the crackling of the fire seemed louder in the silence that followed. Meanwhile, at the Johnsons' house, Marcus and Sophia were preparing for a quieter Christmas. They'd decided not to push further for an invitation to the block party, focusing instead on creating their own celebration. Sophia suggested hosting a small gathering for Ellie's school friends and their families, a modest but heartfelt event that wouldn't rely on the approval of their neighbors. Ellie was thrilled at the idea. "Can we have hot chocolate and marshmallows?" she asked excitedly. "Of course," Sophia said with a smile. "And maybe your dad can show everyone the nativity scene." Marcus nodded, though his heart felt heavy. He couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how much they tried, they would always be seen as outsiders in this place. As the days ticked closer to Christmas Eve, word of the Johnsons' plans spread quietly among the neighborhood kids. Some parents expressed curiosity, but hesitated, unsure of how their attendance might be perceived. Others, like Mrs. Green, were openly supportive. "You tell Marcus I'll be there," she said when Sophia delivered a plate of cookies to her doorstep. "And I'll bring my famous eggnog." Even Linda Harper heard about the gathering, though she didn't mention it to anyone. Instead, she watched from her window as neighbors stopped by the Johnsons' yard to admire the nativity scene or exchange a few warm words. Something about it stirred an unfamiliar feeling in her chest, a mix of guilt and the faintest flicker of envy. Christmas Eve arrived with a sense of quiet anticipation. The Johnsons had spent the day preparing for their small gathering. Sophia baked her signature cinnamon cookies, while Ellie helped arrange marshmallows in neat little bowls for the hot chocolate bar. Marcus worked outside, ensuring the nativity scene was perfectly lit and the walkway was clear of snow. The house smelled of spices and pine, and for the first time since their move, it felt like Christmas. Yet Marcus and Sophia exchanged hesitant glances throughout the day. What if no one came? What if they had put their hearts into this only to be met with silence? By late afternoon, the first guests arrived. Mrs. Green carrying a large thermos of eggnog and a plate of gingerbread men. "These are for the kids," she said with a warm smile. "And this," she added, gesturing to the eggnog, "is for the grown-ups." Her arrival was soon followed by a handful of parents and children, most of whom had heard about the gathering through Ellie's enthusiastic invitations at school. The kids immediately ran outside to marvel at the nativity scene, their laughter cutting through the stillness of the evening. Inside, the mood was lighter than Marcus and Sophia had dared to hope. Neighbors mingled cautiously at first, but the smell of fresh cookies and the sound of children singing carols quickly eased the tension. Marcus watched as Sophia moved gracefully through the room, her warmth drawing people into conversations. He stayed mostly by the window, keeping an eye on the growing crowd in their yard. Then, to their surprise, Linda Harper's husband, John, arrived. He walked in carrying a tray of beautifully arranged pastries. "Linda's in the middle of something," he said, a little sheepishly, "but I wanted to stop by. Marcus, I hope you don't mind. I've been hearing about your nativity scene all week, and I had to see it for myself." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "Of course not. Thanks for coming." As the evening progressed, more neighbors trickled in. Some came out of curiosity, others out of a sense of obligation, but many stayed longer than they'd planned, drawn in by the Johnsons' hospitality. The sound of carols filled the air, blending with the laughter of children and the hum of conversation. For the first time since they moved in, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps they were finally being seen. Outside, Linda Harper stood at her window, watching the lights from the Johnsons' house flicker against the snow. She could hear faint strains of Silent Night drifting through the air, mixed with the unmistakable sound of joy. Her chest tightened. "What are you doing?" John's voice startled her. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, his coat already on. "I'm just thinking," she said softly. "Well, think on the way," he said, holding up her scarf. "Because the real Christmas party is happening at the Johnsons'." Linda hesitated, her mind racing with excuses, but something in John's expression stopped her. He wasn't asking, he was telling her what she already knew deep down. She had no choice but to face it. With a sigh, she bundled up and followed him outside. The walk to the Johnsons' house felt longer than it should have, each step weighed down by the unspoken words she knew she had to say. When Linda stepped into the warm glow of the Johnsons' home, the room fell quiet for a brief moment. Her presence was unexpected, and even Marcus and Sophia exchanged surprised glances. But it was Ellie who broke the silence, running up to Linda with a beaming smile. "Mrs. Harper, "Did you come to see Daddy's nativity scene? It's right outside." Linda's carefully rehearsed words caught in her throat. Instead of responding, she allowed Ellie to tug her toward the window. As she gazed at the glowing display, something shifted inside her. It wasn't just the craftsmanship that struck her. It was the love and care that radiated from every detail. "This is incredible," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus, standing nearby, nodded politely. "Thank you," he said, his tone even. He wasn't ready to let his guard down just yet. Linda turned to him, her expression softening. "Marcus, Sophia, I owe you both an apology. I've been wrong. I let my own prejudices blind me to what this neighborhood could be, to who you are." Sophia stepped forward, her eyes kind but firm. "We all make mistakes, Linda. The question is what you're going to do about it." For the first time in a long while, Linda found herself at a loss for words, but as she looked around the room, at the neighbors laughing together and the children singing carols, she knew the answer. "I'll do better," she said simply. "I promise." And as the night wore on, Linda found herself not just observing but participating, joining in the carols, sharing stories with Marcus and Sophia, and even helping Mrs. Green pour another round of her famous eggnog. For the first time, the Johnsons' house didn't feel like the home of outsiders. It felt like the heart of the neighborhood. As the evening progressed, Linda's initial discomfort began to fade. Her hesitant steps had led her to a pivotal moment, a choice that had felt impossible only hours before. She now found herself sitting beside Marcus and Sophia, laughing with the neighbors she had once kept at arm's length. Even John, who had entered the room with a quiet grin, had slowly relaxing into the atmosphere. The tension that had clouded his face earlier had dissipated, replaced by a genuine smile. Ellie, oblivious to the weight of the moment, ran around the room, spreading joy like the Christmas spirit itself. Her infectious enthusiasm swept through the gathering, helping to heal old wounds. The Johnsons had opened their home with nothing more than a desire to connect, and it had brought something even more meaningful: change. Outside, the nativity scene stood as a quiet sentinel, its lights glowing softly in the crisp night air. For Marcus, it was a symbol of perseverance and belief, a labor of love and faith that transcended the judgments and biases of the world. It was more than just a decoration, it was a statement. The message was clear. Despite the challenges, despite the feeling of exclusion, the Johnsons would continue to stand tall, proudly embracing their place in the world. Around the table, conversations ebbed and flowed. Mrs. Green chatted with Linda, encouraging her to think about organizing the block party in a way that truly reflected the diversity of the neighborhood. She spoke of traditions, yes, but she also spoke of evolution. Traditions can evolve, she said with a knowing smile. They don't have to be static. Change doesn't erase the past, it builds on it. Linda, now more open than ever, listened intently. She had spent years as the neighborhood's gatekeeper, dictating who belonged and who didn't. But the warmth of the Johnsons' hospitality had cracked that facade, and she realized that maybe it wasn't about keeping the peace anymore. Maybe it was about creating something better. As the night drew on, Sophia and Marcus exchanged glances from across the room. There was a quiet understanding between them, a shared moment of recognition. They had fought to be seen, to belong, to create a space where their family could thrive. And now, for the first time, they didn't just feel accepted, they felt embraced. The evening ended with the entire neighborhood gathered outside, the flickering lights of the nativity scene casting long shadows on the snow-covered ground. Ellie stood in the center of the group, holding a small candle. "We can all be together," she said, her voice a soft but clear statement that resonated with everyone around her. "It's what Christmas is about, right?" The simplicity of her words struck a chord with each person present. The crowd fell silent, the flickering flames casting a gentle glow on their faces. In that moment, there were no barriers, no divisions, just people, united by the spirit of Christmas and the realization that, perhaps for the first time, they had finally come together. Linda, standing at the edge of the crowd, watched the scene unfold. For the first time, she saw her neighbors not as different or unfamiliar, but as people. people who had stories, hopes, and dreams, just like hers. It was a humbling realization, one that she knew would change her, just as it had already changed the neighborhood. With a final glance at Marcus and Sophia, she stepped forward, her voice steady and sincere. "I want to thank you," she said, addressing the group, but her words aimed directly at them, "for showing me what Christmas really means. It's not about traditions or keeping things the way they've always been. It's about community. It's about making room for everyone. And I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." Her apology wasn't just for the Johnsons. It was for herself as well, a recognition that her own biases had held her back from the fullness of the human experience. The Johnsons, for all their grace and patience, had offered her the most powerful gift of all, the opportunity to change. So she'd sent the DMD. As the night wound down and the last of the guests trickled out, Marcus and Sophia stood in the doorway, watching the snow gently fall. Their hearts were full, not just with the success of their gathering, but with the knowledge that something had shifted. The road to unity hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. They had not just built a nativity scene that reflected their faith, they had built a bridge that connected them to their community, one act of kindness at a time. Inside, Ellie was already snuggled up in bed, dreaming of a world where everyone was welcome, where barriers fell away, and where Christmas could be every day. Marcus and Sophia stood there for a moment longer, letting the quiet peace of the night settle in. They had come to this place seeking belonging, but what they had found was something even more powerful, the opportunity to help others find their place too. And in doing so, they had made a community stronger, more united, and more human. And as the last echoes of laughter from their home faded into the night, one thing was clear. The true spirit of Christmas was alive and well, not in the decorations or the gifts, but in the hearts of those who dared to believe in each other. As the last of the evening's guests waved goodbye and the front door gently clicked shut, a soft stillness settled over the Johnsons' home. The laughter, the chatter, the festive music, it all felt like a distant memory now, carried off into the quiet night. But within those walls, something transformative had taken place. Marcus and Sophia stood in the kitchen, their hands busy with the familiar task of tidying up, but their hearts were lighter than they had been in years. "You did it," Marcus said, his voice a mix of awe and pride. He glanced over at Sophia, who was quietly wiping down the counter. "I didn't think it would happen this way." Sophia paused for a moment, meeting his gaze. She had always believed in the power of community and forgiveness, but even she hadn't expected such a profound shift in the neighborhood's dynamic. "I didn't think it would either," she admitted, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "But sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to make the first move." That person, in this case, had been Ellie, a little girl with an innocence that transcended all the barriers adults often created. It had been her enthusiasm, her unwavering belief in the goodness of others, that had drawn people in, and from there it had snowballed. One conversation led to another, one gesture of kindness led to another. And suddenly the Johnsons weren't outsiders anymore. They were neighbors, no longer defined by the color of their skin but by the simple fact that they were people, just like everyone else. As the last plate was stacked in the dishwasher, Sophia took a deep breath, letting the weight of the evening's events sink in. "I think things will be different now," she said, her voice filled with hope, not just for us, but for the whole neighborhood. Marcus nodded, though a trace of wariness still lingered in his eyes. He knew that true change would take time. There would still be moments of discomfort, of uncertainty, but for the first time he believed it was possible. "It's a start," he agreed. "A small one, but it's a start." Outside, the nativity scene stood glowing in the soft light, its figures gently outlined in the winter night. The scene was simple, yet so powerful. It was a testament to Marcus's skill, to his love for his family, and to the quiet strength that had carried them through years of subtle rejection. It had started as a personal project, something for his own family to cherish, but it had become much more. It had been the catalyst for something bigger, a lesson about the power of community, of standing up for what's right, and of breaking down the walls that divide us. But as the snowflakes continued to drift from the sky, something else became clear. This was not just a story about one neighborhood or one family, it was a story about all of us. The subtle ways we either build or break down the invisible walls that separate us. How easily we can slip into old habits, old biases, without even realizing it. How often we let fear and discomfort dictate our actions, but also how, if we are willing to listen, to open our hearts and to make room for others, we can break through those walls. We can build a world that is stronger and more united than the one we found. The next day, the neighborhood was different. The streets, dusted with fresh snow, felt more like home. People waved to each other as they passed, stopped for short conversations, shared smiles that were genuine, not just polite. The tension that had once hung in the air had faded, replaced by a newfound sense of belonging. Linda Harper, despite her initial resistance, had kept her promise. She had become an advocate for change, speaking to other neighbors about the importance of inclusivity, of truly welcoming the Johnsons into their fold. The block party, when it came, was a celebration of everyone. There were no barriers anymore, just people coming together to celebrate what truly mattered: love, kindness, and a shared commitment to building a better community. In the weeks that followed, Sophia and Marcus continued to invite their neighbors into their home, always with the same warmth, the same openness that had sparked this change. And each time, they felt the distance between them and the rest of the community grow smaller, their connections deeper. What had once felt like a battle for acceptance had transformed into something richer, a celebration of difference, of individuality, and of unity. As for Ellie, she remained blissfully unaware of the weight her small act had carried. She continued to run through the neighborhood, her laughter a constant echo in the air. But that was the beauty of it. To her, there was no question of belonging. There was no other. There was only friendship. And in that simplicity lay the most profound lesson of all. The Johnsons had shown their neighbors that it wasn't the decorations, the traditions, or even the parties that made Christmas special. It was the people. The willingness to see each other, to understand each other, to offer forgiveness and love. It was a lesson that transcended the season, one that would remain in the hearts of those who had been touched by it for years to come. For Marcus, Sophia, and Ellie, the Christmas they had celebrated that year would always be remembered, not for the presents or the food or the music, but for the way they had brought their community together, for the way they had dismantled the barriers that kept them apart, and for the way they had made a home not just for themselves, but for everyone around them. It was a home built on kindness, on courage, and on the belief that, despite our differences, we all have a place in this world.